So we are continuing our walk through the first letter of John, and we're here in the second chapter, and we were talking yesterday about living the commandments. But the prime commandments are to live as those, in the context of love God, love neighbor. And when you do that, you're going to follow all the other commandments by default. And so what you see there is that understanding that living the commandments. So what we're really called to do is live in this love relationship with Christ. And if we truly love him, we will follow not only the 10 commandments, but even more. And so there's that powerful truth that is there. And what I talked about is to be careful of following these rules as if you're following the commandments. And some people can do that, and they're just nasty people, but they follow the rules. And I gave the example. I'm not saying the person was a nasty person. I have no idea who the person was. But there was the case of the guy who refused to receive communion because he hadn't fasted for an hour. He finished lunch 55 minutes before the priest was distributing communion. And I said that, yeah, granted, 60 minutes is a full hour today, but it wasn't a full hour in the time of Jesus because they didn't have watches. So you have to understand that you don't want to be so strict with yourself and with others, because if you're going to be strict with yourself, you're going to be just as strict with others, or at least somewhat strict with others, that you force yourself to live at a standard that is just a little bit over the edge. Now, 55 minutes, 60 minutes, I always assume on anything, 5 minutes either way is okay. If I'm supposed to, granted, if I'm supposed to be at an appointment, I'll be there on time or maybe a couple minutes before. If I don't really consider myself late until I'm over 5 minutes late, which I try to avoid at all costs. But as you can see, you want to do everything within the human standard. But there are those who will be really strict with the law, meaning these rules, but they have no love there. And that's always a problem. They can be pretty nasty people, and they are not living the commandment that Jesus called them to live. They're just not. And why? Because the ultimate commandment is love God and love neighbor. That's what we're called to do. And when that becomes your motivation, you will do powerful things. Remember, Jesus says, you will do greater things than I. You will do powerful things because you're doing it rooted in love. And so you'll be doing those things that are love of God, love of neighbor. You will do things in love. And that's a whole different context. And remember, the law never enters that jurisdiction. You can see, the law will say, this is the rule you have to follow. Well, charity is not part of the law because charity comes from the heart. There may be things that charity means love. There may be things that you are called to do out of charity, but charity doesn't come to the law. It come from the law. A good way to put it is a chaplain, when I was in the Navy, put it really simple. You can't legislate charity. It can't be done. And actually, the case was, I was on a ship, and the master-at-arms, who represents the law on the ship, had all kinds of pornographic pictures on what is known as the bulkheads in film world. It's the wall. And I talked to the chaplain of, how do I deal with that? Not just because there were pornographic pictures on the wall, but because that was illegal in the Navy. And here is the guy who is supposed to be enforcing the law. And the reason why they're illegal in the Navy is if you have a flood, which, face it, in the Navy can happen, if you have a flood in that space, all those pictures will come off the wall and they will clog the dewatering stuff. It doesn't matter what the pictures are. It could be pictures of anything. And they will clog the dewatering equipment, which is the stuff, obviously, that takes the water out of the compartment and it gets it out of the ship. It'll clog the dewatering equipment, which could endanger the mission of the ship. And here he was, the one called to enforce the law, and he wasn't doing it. And so I talked to the chaplain and I said, how do I deal with this? Because first of all, you've got these pictures on his wall which really shouldn't be there to begin with. It's not a professional environment. And then secondly, all this water, all these pictures would come off the wall, or the bulkhead, actually, we said in the Navy, in the case of a flood. And he looked at me, he said, "You can't legislate charity. You're not going to fight this battle. You have to let it go, and you have to understand that this is what he's doing. He's violating, and obviously his supervisors are not telling him this is unacceptable, and it was a problem." He says, "But you can't legislate charity. If he is the one who enforces the law and he refuses to follow the law himself, and there's no one calling him to account for that among his supervisors, there isn't much else you can do. You just have to bear with it." And, always keep that in mind. We're called to live at a higher standard than the law. So here is this guy, if he was truly living what the law called him to do in a way of charity, he would have enough respect for his fellow sailors that he would never have anything on the wall, because he'd realize he endangered the life of every person on the ship. But he was the one who was there to enforce the letter of the law. But it's charity, which is in the heart of everyone, that calls us to live the spirit of the law, which goes beyond the letter of the law and calls us to be loving to one another. So you can see that radical difference. We'll talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the voice of St. Anthony Parish from Allston, Massachusetts, right here on WROL 950 AM 100.3 FM. And you can also hear us at CatholicAudiomedia.com. We'll be right back right after this. Did you ever want to have some form of input into the homily preparation of a priest? Do you ever want to share with a priest or deacon ideas you may have for him to preach at Mass? Well, let me invite you to CatholicAudiomedia.com. Click on Input for Homily in the top left side of the page and follow the instructions there. Your words may have a great input on what is preached at St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. So remember, CatholicAudiomedia.com, click on Input for Homily and follow the instructions. And your words may make a difference in what is preached at St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. St. Anthony Parish, Allston, Massachusetts. And don't forget our website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com, where you can check out our website. You can check out the archives of the show. You can check out our Substack newsletter. You can check out our blog. You can share our archives as well. And we're soon going to have a shopping page if you'd like to support the show that way. And if you'd like to donate to the show, that would really be helpful to us. And by the way, you can send us a donation to 43 Holton Street in Allston, Massachusetts. That's 43 Holton Street, Allston, Massachusetts, right to St. Anthony Parish. And we'd really appreciate it, because it also lets our people above me know that the radio show is working. We received an email from California the other day, and we don't know how the person learned about the parish, but we suspect the obvious, that they were listening to the radio show, and it meant a lot to the people. Oh, good, there were people listening to the radio show who are responding. That means a lot to these people, especially during this interesting time. You may have heard that the Pope talked about a media conglomerate. I don't know forget exactly what he used, but a media group here, and a lot of people assumed it's an American media group, of which we are not affiliated, that actually hates him so much that they want to have a new pope, which he finds disturbing because he says it hurts the church. Well, you know what? We are faithful to everything the church calls us to do. We're faithful to Catholic teaching. And by the way, if you hear something on here that you say, this is not faithful to Catholic teaching, well, that's something to let me know. And I would be surprised, but I probably would be able to respond, yes, it is, and let me explain to you why. But we're called to be faithful to, and we're called to be faithful Catholics, and I will always come in a way that challenge us to be stronger Catholics. But you can respond to us, you can do all that stuff through CatholicAudiomedia.com. Don't forget, tonight we have adoration at 6 o'clock at 43 Holton Street in Allston, Massachusetts. Come by, and I also am available for confession. So anyway, we're talking about this important issue of knowing the commandment that we see from St. John, to love God and to love neighbor. And that becomes the source of essentially our law. And this is what he says: this way we may know that we know him by keeping his commandments. And when we say, I know him, but I do not keep his commandments, anyone who does that is a liar. Oh, yeah, I know Jesus. Yeah, I am, the whole bit. Anyone who goes to church every Sunday, but it does not live what God calls us to do, that's not being a Christian. And he says, no, that person is a liar. We're called to live the commandments: love God, love neighbor. And therefore, by doing so, by living what Christ calls us to do, by being rooted, by seeking to grow closer to Christ in love of God, love of neighbor, by seeking to love our neighbor more powerfully, by doing that, we are showing that we are truly faithful to the Lord, and we are actually living in union with him when we do that. And you can't really do that just by following simple rules, because the rules are not fleshed out. You need the rules. Never go below the standard of the law, but you can go above the standard of the law. And so that's where we're called to be. And, even some people will say, well, this is the law, and we've got to start telling people who aren't following that law that they have to change their way or else. Well, wait a minute. That law is one of a larger part of law that says love God, love neighbor. So we shouldn't be calling people to follow that law. We should be calling people to follow the entire spirit of the law, which is to love God and love neighbor. And when we do that, we live at a very radical, and I mean in a Dorothy Day type love of God, love neighbor form of loving God, not a radical, violent. Obviously, she was a pacifist even during World War II, but a very powerful, life-changing to others, life-changing sign of God's love, of life-changing way. Her friend Peter Morin, who co-founded the Catholic worker movement, I'm not encouraging the people necessarily to do that, would literally take his shoes off and give it to people who didn't have shoes. That's pretty radical, if you ask me. Father Adriano Zandana tomorrow. Have a blessed day. We have a website for our programs that will connect you to the parish, the blog, and to share your prayer requests with us. If you've been touched by our program, you can even show your support through your donation. We are at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's all one word, CatholicAudiomedia.com. It is updated regularly with blog posts and podcasts of the program. So stay connected with us and tell us how this show has touched your heart. CatholicAudiomedia.com. In Cristo vivimos.